Hello everyone, Kent Bressler here. I want to welcome you to Kent's Kidney Stories. During our time together over these podcasts, I'd like to discuss kidney disease. I'd like to tell you about my journey as a transplant patient, but also talk about dialysis, kidney donation, and just about anything else that might be of interest. Kent's Kidney Stories, a podcast endorsed and sponsored by KidneySolutions.org.
Hello everyone, this is Kent, and I'm going to do some podcasting. One of the things we're going to do today is we're going to get probably a little bit deeper than just the general listener would think about, but we're going to put it in terms that you can understand, and this is going to be, I think, a very powerful podcast concerning genetic testing. So without further ado, I'd like to say a prayer to get us started. The gospel tells us, Lord, that you went away to lonely places to pray. In our busy days of noise and action, remind us of the need for time alone and for peace and quiet and silence within. Be with us now as we pause for a few moments just in quiet. Amen. Okay, I am excited because one of my Florida friends happened to take a flight into Phoenix, and she called in, said she wanted to talk about genetic testing. I said, wow, I'd love to hear about genetic testing because it's the rage now. Everybody's wanting to get tickled by it. And who I'm talking about is Payal Shah, PhD pharmacist, and I think a renowned speaker on just about anything pharmaceutical. And I just love having her on because I believe, honestly, when we looked at our numbers, she gets a lot of pull. A lot of people like listen to her. So I'm bringing her back, and I'm going to keep bringing her back until we either quit like what we're doing or we just decide to stop. I don't know. One thing or the other, we're gonna keep going. Payal, how are you today?
I'm doing good, Kent. How are you? Happy Friday.
Yeah, same to you. We look at a lot of things in kidney disease, and just to refresh everybody's memory, you were transplanted at the age of 15.
Yeah,
right?
I was just about to. I was just about to turn 16, and I got my transplant here in Phoenix, where I'm visiting currently. It's funny because since I'm home visiting my parents, we just pulled out home videos. And do you remember back in the day, the camcorders, the handheld camcorders?
Yeah, I do.
So my parents were just recently like, we need to transfer these from the cassettes onto, the cloud. So we're in the process of doing some transferring of those videos. And it was the day after that I received my transplant that we had recorded, and then the day that I got discharged from the hospital 5 days later post my transplant, and it just brought back so many memories. And
I'll bet it did.
And it was unbelievable. It was just crazy to, first of all, how much we've grown in the past 22 years, obviously, how different we look, but just it really brought me back to the time of what was going on in our lives, and how, when a family member is going through kidney failure and going through dialysis or a transplant, just what impact it takes on the family. So it just brought back such both good and bad memories, to be honest.
Oh, sure.
Lots of feelings. So, but it's nice to be back in Phoenix. I love Phoenix. It's my home, and just to be surrounded by the people that, at that time, 20 years ago, that were with me and my family that are still here in Phoenix, being able to see them and be with them. And just the love you feel from
Yeah,
all those
that's
family
right.
and friends.
That's
You
what I
can't
was.
beat it. You
Yeah, I
can't
was
beat
just
it.
gonna say the love's got to be overwhelming. Got to ask
Oh,
you a question. Did you
yeah,
cry? Did you tear up?
I did not cry, but I tell you, my dad was very quiet,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
there was a lot of self-reflection, self-introspection, and I think a lot of feelings that both he and my mom, being that I was pretty young,
Oh,
the fact that they felt so helpless at that time, I think a little bit of that came back into play for them a little bit. Just
sure,
those
sure.
feelings of what happened, why did it happen? So I could feel that from my dad for sure.
Our little girl.
Yeah.
Yeah, really. That
But
I started working on my memoirs about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, and I draw it when I have inspiration. I don't just sit and try to get it done because it's not that kind of document. And came upon a thing that I wanted to put in there, and it had to do with how my wife and I responded to the diagnosis. And it actually, I guess the point I want to make here: people with kidney disease, people who've had a transplant, have a tendency to have an emotional trigger that will allow them to kind of grieve. They'll kind of
yeah.
tear up, and that made me tear up. And I've seen it in a lot of my friends. They start talking about it. But yeah, I'm so glad you're out there and get to see them, and I'm so glad they're still here. Right?
Yes, absolutely. Bingo. And it's just really been, while we're in the midst of the world right now and whatever's going on,
Yeah.
this is the time you take a moment just to count your blessings and say, it's just nice to be with family and be with loved ones and spend this quality, slow down and spend this time with them. So
Sure.
it's been great. It's been great. Yeah.
And not to dwell on this anymore, but I understand things are going good at work, and I couldn't be happier for you. You're a very special person. So, we I don't know how we came upon this idea to do genetic testing. I think we had heard something somewhere along the line and thought that it would be a very good pharmaceutical talk. And then you mentioned, well, I want to put this on a podcast. Well, I'm ready to go. I think I'm going to have you give your presentation. I'm going to shut up and let you get going.
Yeah, Ken, I think the biggest thing about genetic testing, well, first and foremost, let me back up and say, I think nephrology in general has been stagnant. We have room for improvement. We have room to move forward, and whether it means drug development, medical devices, going from when I was on hemodialysis, those machines were so huge. They're so big. And I think there has been progress made, especially with the push to be on home hemodialysis through the most recent initiative put forth last year by the Trump administration. But I think in terms of how we are diagnosing patients, are we catching patients early enough? I think there's a lot of room to make improvements here, and I'm sure you'll agree with me.
Yes,
the
ma'am.
thing about the kidneys is that you really don't know that there's something wrong until it's too late.
Yeah.
By the time you present to a nephrologist, you're already just a few months out from dialysis, and so how can we and when I say we, I mean practitioners, patients,
the whole world,
healthcare providers as a whole.
Yep.
How can we all be better at catching these patients earlier so that can we manage them, whether it's with pharmacological treatments or whether it's with just monitoring management, how can we catch these patients earlier so that perhaps we can delay a patient from getting to dialysis and or transplantation. And so, I think genetic testing does have a role in nephrology because for a multitude of reasons. I think it helps with, first of all, based on my research, what I found is that there's 150 rare diseases that affect the kidney.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yep.
That's a lot. And on top of that, 50% of our pediatrics, so our kiddos that have kidney disease of an unknown origin, 50%, there's a genetic component to it. And it's 20% for adults. So there's room to say, again, and I'll also preface at this point and say, genetic testing may not be for a particular patient or a family. This is definitely a conversation to be had with your doctor if there's interest. If you feel like you don't, a lot of times we don't have a known diagnosis for our kidney failure. So if you feel like there's probably some room to get a genetic test done, definitely warrants a conversation with the doctor. So when I say that there could be a genetic component, this means that there could, and when I talk about genetics, there's different patterns of how things are transferred from, your parents and our ancestors, how it comes down. There's different inheritance patterns, which I'm not going to really get into today, but I just really want to talk about both the pros and cons of genetic testing so that our listeners can be a little bit more knowledgeable and hopefully talk to the doctor to determine if it's, a good option for them. So in a recent study, there was in the New England Journal of Medicine, there's a group in Colombia. And what they did was they took 3,000 patients that had varied forms of CKD. Some of them were known etiologies. So for example, you had PKD, you had FSGS, you had, IgA. I'm blanking on IgA nephropathy, bingo. And what they found was that 10% of these patients had some kind of genetic mutation.
10%.
And so 10%.
10%. Okay.
And so and what happened with these patients is either from the initial diagnosis, either they were misdiagnosed or they were not diagnosed at all. So what happened is when they got their genetic results back, this changed their clinical management of how they were treated.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So perhaps they were getting the wrong dose of medications. They were on immunosuppression and it was not working for them. Well, why wasn't it working for them? Because the genetic mutation does not respond
Exactly. And that's a waste of time.
Immunosuppression.
Yeah.
It's a waste of time. It's a waste of energy, money. Obviously,
yep.
you're giving medication that a patient's not going to respond to. And so understanding where genetic testing may lie for a patient is really important and how it can change your outcome. It may not be for everyone, but certainly there is room to say, if I am able to get some more information on my diagnosis, what does that mean for me? This can mean maybe I can participate in a clinical trial. Maybe I can help when it comes to family planning. I have more information. And on top of that, I'll also say the importance of genetic counseling. So what happens when you receive these results, right? Who do you talk to? Sometimes the nephrologist may not feel comfortable to dissect these results. So knowing that genetic counseling is also a very important component to the genetic testing process is very, very important. So any questions or any, did you go through genetic testing?
No, when I had my kidney disease, I didn't know about FSGS. They told me that in all, they had sent my biopsy off to John Hopkins, and they said they called it that at that time, but that's very little known about it. I wanted to go back to you said 10% are genetic in this one group. If you do the math on that, that may be as many as 3 million people in that would be affected. That's probably a way of looking at this. Well, what 10%? That's not very much. That's hardly a discount on a dress. But take that for you. That's 3 million people. So there you go.
When you have 30 million people afflicted with CKD in the States, that can add up to a lot of people.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, Now, many institutions look at genetic testing very differently. They will say that biopsy is the gold standard, and certainly
Yes.
I'm not here to disagree or agree.
No, whatever.
But it's up to each individual practitioner, institution. But we could probably start looking at it as very complementary. They both work hand in hand to provide that definitive diagnosis. And so certainly, and I will also say that genetic testing is not always covered by insurance companies.
Yep.
There can be some legal ramifications. There could be some pitfalls when it comes to getting life insurance. Some life insurance companies may not allow for the pre-existing conditions. And so, there's pros and cons. And that's why I always say you have to talk to your doctor. You have to talk amongst your family members. You have to get all the information to make a very informed decision to determine if this is right for you. But I really wanted to at least put genetic testing out there, because when we start going to more and more conferences, when you start listening to more and more webinars, precision medicine, genetic testing, it's very much a hot topic right now.
Yeah, you bet.
And so I just wanted to, I'd love to get, after this podcast goes up, I'd love to get some feedback if anyone's gone through genetic testing and has it helped them, what their thoughts were through the process, and did it change their clinical management at all? I'd love to get some feedback in that regard.
I just had a thought come in my mind. So does this when you're elderly. These things keep flying through your brain. So here you go. You're a transplant recipient, right? You're 5 years out. You're 22 years out. You're 30 years out. Of what value would genetic testing have any value at this point in your journey? Excuse me.
So perhaps, I think if you don't have a definitive diagnosis, for example, for me, I have considered genetic testing because I don't have a definitive diagnosis.
Exactly. That was my next question. You were never biopsied.
Correct.
Right. So you don't have a diagnosis.
Yes. Well, I was biopsied, but it was inconclusive.
Okay, that's right. That's right. No, yep. My apologies.
So no, that's okay. So I've thought about genetic testing because will it provide some insight as to what mutation, and it may not be the gold star of what actually caused my kidney failure. It may not, being that I'm 22 years out, but certainly what it could do as well is, and genetic testing also has a role for a potential donor as well.
Yeah. Yes. That's a great point. That's a great point. Yeah.
So there's room for it in transplant recipients and in donors to determine the risk of level of rejection in the recipient based on the donor's genetic makeup. So there's, and I'm sure you've heard of the gene APOL1, which is very, very common in African Americans. But when those family members want to donate to, or, a friend wants to donate to a recipient who has APOL1 as the cause of their kidney failure, they can determine the risk factors of recurrence in the recipient. And, it warrants a discussion on whether or not they would be a good donor, a feasible donor or not.
Given the fact that there's a lot of I don't know what the correct term here, having a APOL1 diagnosis and then wanting to have a donor come in, is that testing for that donor absorbed into the cost of the transplant? Or is that, that's something to me, because that may keep a donor away from opening the door if there's a quote limit or a dollar amount having to pay up front and it's not covered in that's what my question is. Have you heard of that it's covered?
That's a great question. I will say I'm not sure.
I'm not sure either.
for the donor, where does it fall into as far as being covered? That's a great question. I don't know, and I'd love to know if a listener has some insight on that.
Absolutely. And one of the things that's very upsetting to me is the ability for Blacks and Hispanics to really get in this kidney world for donation. And if there's a financial drawback to it, already we know what can happen with these transplants, then by golly, somehow we got to get on the insurance company to get on board, all right? Or the transplant programs to get on board, or the pharmaceutical companies to get on board, or the testing. Somebody's got to come up, step up, and help the individual, the patient. That's the crux here, right?
Absolutely. I will say, and I'm happy to provide some resources at the end of the podcast, or certainly maybe we can list them, when we list the podcast, we can list some resources where patients can go to look at a few options for genetic testing and bring it to their physician to determine if it's the right option for them. Okay. I'd be happy to provide some of that.
That would be good. And I'll tell you, in order to get the results that we want from this, and we've never done this, but I'm going to ask the listeners, and we have a good number. We're not going to talk numbers here, but if you have any indications that you would like information, make sure that you come back to kidneysolutions.org, and we'll have that on our platform for that at kidneysolutions.org, or give me a call or an email into kent.bressler@kidneysolutions.org, and we will get you that information. Even if you don't know if you want to do genetic testing, if you have any questions about it, let's get back to Payal on it and have her. We'll get you the info. You have the interest, we'll get you the info. Okay, so I guess I kind of got you off track. Sometimes I do that, and that bothers me a great deal because you are on a roll. Tell me more. What do you have? What more do you have?
Well, so I just really wanted to kind of talk about, we touched on it a little bit, but I really wanted to talk about both the benefits and maybe the opportunities of genetic testing. Of course, the benefits are in our pediatric patients. We know with our pediatric patients, it's a special group.
Oh, yes.
When you're diagnosed with kidney failure, or kidney disease for that matter, and you're going through dialysis, transplantation, what have you, this whole journey is it's taxing. It's physically taxing. It's mentally taxing. So providing for genetic testing, again, it's a family decision. So understanding, a lot of times, maybe parents don't want to know.
Sure.
Because what will they do? What will they do with that information?
Absolutely.
So I wanted to just point out that while there are benefits, there are also those emotional challenges that comes with genetic testing. In the other bucket, it allows for more opportunities to be a part of clinical trials. It exposes you to say, well, now that I have a definitive diagnosis, I can look for clinical trials to determine if, is there, what's being done out there. And there are opportunities, and a lot of pharma companies that are looking at these rare diseases that are leading to end-stage kidney disease that are really, I think they're pushing that momentum, and it's just a matter of finding them. So if there's any interest in being a part of clinical trials, genetic testing helps with that. And then just, allows that it's a peace of mind, knowing what direction your disease state's going to go, and that you can find the support accordingly. Now, I will say, I think we talked a little bit about the opportunities that exist with genetic testing. Of course, there's the emotional side of it. What will you do with the diagnosis? Mm-hmm. Will the insurance companies pay for it? That's also a big hurdle, and I think it depends on the gene panel, is what I'm understanding. Yes. Just based on my knowledge that I'm collecting, is it depends really on the panel if insurance companies will test for it, and how much the patient would be required to pay if necessary. And I also wanted to take some time and talk about genetic counseling.
That's a good point. Yep. Yes, ma'am.
So, making sure that if you do go through with the genetic testing, that you are talking to the doctor about who is doing the counseling, who's reading the report, and who's going to provide that information to both the nephrologist and the patient. These genetic readouts, the summaries that you receive after you go through the testing, can be kind of wordy, very cumbersome, lots of scientific jargon in there. So
Yep.
making sure that it's dissectable and patients can really have a good grasp on what does it mean. And I think it's also important for a nephrologist, and I'd actually love to have a nephrologist perspective on what does genetic counseling mean to them, and how are they able to read the reports, and what do they do with that information? I'd love to know kind of their thoughts on it. But I think making sure that that information gets consolidated in a very easy, dissectable, not overwhelming manner is important as well after the fact.
You know as well as I do that it's patient choice, patient options, patient decision. So this is not about what would be anything but good for the patient, but they are the one that makes the decision. And we go to that at every part of our disease process. Even when we know we have the disease, there's no use fretting about it. You got it, so deal with it, right? So it's something that you have to make a decision on. You want to do it, and then you have to be ready for the results. Once the results are in, then as you make your suggestion, is the counseling probably one of the most important things with the whole thing.
Yeah.
And having a good professional to do that. And they're available.
Yep.
Well, you've opened up another can of worms. We have to go find that person and have them do this, right?
Well, so a lot of institutions, based on my research, what I'm understanding is that, if you're at an academic institution, for example, they will either have genetic testing capabilities in-house.
Sure.
So that means it's the whole package. So they have the testing available. They also have the genetic counselors available right on site.
Sure.
Or if they have to send them out of house, then usually same thing. You'll have a package available to you where the testing goes out to a lab, and then once they get the results, either the genetic counselor can be in-house, or they can be associated with that lab. So the doctor, depending on what they choose and where the ease of their genetic testing capabilities are, the physician should be able to give you all that information.
Exactly. And Tim, for us novices out in the hill country and out in the spaces where we don't have access to those organizations, I don't know what the answer to it is, but a lot of underprivileged and people with diabetes and kidney disease that have no clue how to access these places, that's an important part of this. So your nephrologist, again, in counsel with you, you got to ask the nephrologist. That's where you're at.
Absolutely. And like I said, I'd love to, after the podcast and where we can list some resources, I'm happy to shoot over some resources.
Yes.
So, and perhaps we can put some links up, and that way it can be an easy click, and a patient can take that information to the doctor as well and see if it's a good decision for them.
Well, I have it on good report from a very good friend of mine, James Myers, who lives in Hammond, Indiana. Oh, I say Illinois, but I know better. It's Indiana. And he has a show on the internet, and he's going to have you on Friday. I don't know if you remembered that. I'm glad I reminded you. Anyway, we're going to package this up after we're done here. We're going to put it in and link, and we're going to send it right to him so he can listen to it just straight up, so that he has some ammo for you when you come on. And that's an avenue which is a bigger, much, much, much bigger avenue than mine. But we get on the real highway there, and we'll get the super highway, and we'll get this information out there. But I do want the people out here now that happen to listen to this, have any interest at all, or know of someone who has interest in genetic testing, to please query us, email us, call us, whatever. Go on the website kidneysolutions.org, and let's have a conversation on this. Let's get educated up. Yep. Okay. All right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I only know what I hear and what I, professionally and personally, I've personally not gone through the genetic testing process. So I love to hear about experiences and thoughts, pros, cons, all of the above from our listeners and help me better understand what their take on it is, because I can speak from a professional point of view and why it's perhaps preferred over a biopsy. It's not as invasive, and who wants to go through a biopsy where a genetic testing is a quick blood draw or a saliva sample.
Yeah.
It's a lot more easier. But I'd love to get a take from a listener who's undergone it.
We'll find one. And we'll work in. Now, let me just back up again. Now you get me going here, and we're probably going to be here all afternoon. Anyway, this idea of biopsies, and I'm not a doctor, and I don't want to pretend that I am, but biopsies are very invasive. But they're also, in some cases, in some transplant programs, they are embedded as part of the process for evaluation. I find that I've always found it troubling because you know what? In 33 years, guess how many biopsies I've had? 0. And I have very close friends who have had 3 or 4. They're not pleasant. I understand, I get it, that they're necessary in some cases, but I don't know where the necessary starts and the necessary ends. Okay? So there are places, and you're okay to say things. I'm going to say CareDx as a allocure or a test that's a blood test for rejection. Okay, so there's got to be blood tests just for genetic testing. So there you go. Yep. So your option again is going back to your nephrologist. If he doesn't know, ask him to find somebody who does. Right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, we don't want to stomp on practices because practices are necessary.
Absolutely, and certainly not here to contraindicate what the nephrologist the nephrologist knows best, and so that's why. But as a patient advocate, I think it's our right to know what's out there and what's up and coming, and like I said, I think genetic testing in nephrology is a hot topic, and it's going to continue to be so over the next few years. So I think there's room to learn more, be knowledged more, and determine if it's the right option for us.
Another good friend of mine, I can keep doing this because my friends in the community, I like to say I have a few of them. Kevin Fowler's very into this idea that we are the ones that make the choice. Patient choice, and that matter of fact, his organization is called that, Passion After It. This is an option for him when we tell him about this to get that out to his world. Let's talk about this genetic testing. Let's see where it can go, and let's get the price down so even the little guy can get it, right?
Yes.
It can only if that's available to people who can't afford it and they're the most vulnerable, there's the most advantage will be gained. And so okay, I get your point. Dadgummit, every time you come on here, you get me going, and this make the world a whole lot smarter. I
think it's just there's a lot of interest here, and like I said, I think nephrology has so much potential, and we just all need to together tap into it and really make some moves. And I'm excited about the nephrology space for over the next few years, because I just think we're on the cusp of good things happening, and for all of us, we deserve more, we want more, and it's our time. And so I will really want to make sure that we're getting the word out there and helping each other out with whether it's medications or devices or processes.
Anything. Yeah.
Anything it is.
Yeah.
So
I'm going to put a shameless plug in for you first before we end. Okay. You just sit back and hear this out. It is okay to say the company that you work with is Reata. And
Yeah.
in that case, I want them to, if anybody from Reata is listening, I want them to realize that what they have is a gift. This gal knows her stuff, and she needs to go on the circuit and talk about the things that involve kidney patients. That's what you do at Reata, and I think this gal is definitely worth her salt. So please get her involved in as much as you can. So thank you. Okay.
Well, thank you, Ken. I appreciate you, and I appreciate you, Jason. You guys are awesome.
You know, when you have a good thoroughbred, it's best to run them. They don't do well in the barn. It's best to run them hard. Okay, so we're going to tap you. And so for all you guys out there that are listening, and gals and whatever, just make sure you go to the website, kidneysolutions.org. We're going to have some information up. Give us some time to get it up there. But if you have questions and you're really interested, email me, kent.bressler@kidneysolutions.org, or call me. The number's on the website, 830-285-2140. Just don't call me at 3 in the morning. And Payal, again, before I tell everybody, I really do appreciate you. So
anytime. I love doing it.
All right.
I have way too much fun.
Okay, listen, folks. Here's your chance. I want you to make sure that you tell people about your kidney disease. If you're looking for a donor, don't give up. If you're trying to make a decision between dialysis and getting a living donor, give me a call. I'll talk to you about getting a living donor, and I do everything for free. And our group at Kidney Solutions is ready to work with you. Until I talk again, keep breathing.